All right, well, hello and welcome to KQED's Teach Do Now webinar in partnership with Educator Innovator. It's Monday, July 21st, and today we'll be talking about social and media making tools to advance learning. I'm your host, Matt Williams, educational technologist at KQED, the Bay Area Public Media Station, and I'm thrilled to kick off this course with amazing guests for our third week now. Before I introduce everyone, I'd like to take a second to explain this webinar in relation to the course and what you should expect the week ahead. Teach Do Now is an online course open to anyone, but targeted for teachers who are interested in learning how to integrate social media and 21st century learning approaches to their teaching practice. This course is designed to present these ideas using tools like Twitter and Google+, so that participants can experience their learning in action. During these 6 weeks, we will present a framework for learning where weekly topics are introduced through our Monday webinars. Participants are encouraged to participate with questions and comments during the webinar, or you can go and watch the webinar archive video later and share your comments then. You can also go deeper into the conversation through our weekly Do Now prompts, where we provide useful resources to help steer the remainder of the weekly conversation, which are on the Teach Do Now blog. Unlike traditional face-to-face courses or even many online courses, this course is happening at any time, anywhere for you, the participant, to share your ideas, reply to others, ask questions, and be present when the time is right for you. We all come to this course with vastly different backgrounds and knowledge of social media, either personally or professionally, and we want this environment to embrace the diversity of our participants' knowledge. Just remember to use the hashtag TeachDoNow so people can see your comments. And a great way to see all the comments is on our tag board at tagboard.com/teachdnow, which pulls comments from Twitter and Google+. And all of our resources for discussion can be found on the Teach Do Now blog at www.kqed.org/teachdonow. Today, our guests are Amy Burvall, Janelle Bence, Jeremy Hyler, and Troy Hicks. And I'd like to give them each a chance to briefly introduce themselves. So why don't we start with you, Amy, since you're on my left on my screen.
Hi, I'm Amy Burvall. Welcome from Sweden, where I'm sitting here at 1 in the morning. But I'm normally from Hawaii, clear across the globe, and I teach at an IB school. I teach theory of knowledge at an IB school on the island of Oahu. And I'm also sort of present on the web as part of History for Music Lovers. It's a parody music channel about history and literature. So most people know me as one of the history teachers from YouTube. But thanks for having me, and I just love everything that KQED does, so I'm so excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Our next guest is Janelle Bence. Janelle, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself? You're on mute, Janelle.
No, I'm good, yeah. Hi, I'm Janelle Bence. I teach at New Tech High at Coppell. It's a one-to-one campus, all problem-based learning. I am an English 1 facilitator in a blended humanities classroom that's called Global Issues. So I teach alongside a world geography / pre-AP human geography teacher. So we're in the same classroom. And I'm really excited about this webinar.
Awesome. Thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm.
And our next guest is Jeremy Hyler. Jeremy, go ahead. Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Jeremy Hyler. I am a 7th and 8th grade English teacher in the smack dab in the middle of Michigan, the state of Michigan, and I am also a teacher consultant for the Chippewa River Writing Project at Central Michigan University, and I just recently co-authored a book with Troy called Create, Compose, Connect, digital using reading, writing, and learning with digital tools in an English classroom.
Excellent. Thanks for coming on the show, Jeremy. And then Troy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Right, and I'm the other half of that co-author team, and been glad to work with Jeremy this week, as a matter of fact, on an open institute for our Chippewa River Writing Project. I'm a former middle school teacher and an associate professor of English at Central Michigan University, and interested in all things related to digital writing.
Awesome. Thank you, Troy. And thank you all for coming. We were going to have Minu Rami join us, but she could not come to join today, so she will not be joining us today. To those watching live right now, we welcome your comments via the Teach Do Now hashtag on Twitter or the Google Plus page. And you can also sign in the chat window on this page and converse here on Educator Innovator. We'll look for your questions that we can address here in the Hangout. And we also look to a participant to join the Hangout, perhaps, if you want to share your thoughts and practice. Let me know at mwilliams@kqed.org, and maybe we can get someone to come in the middle and talk a little bit. So mwilliams@kqed.org. We begin our third week of the course on the topic of social and media making for tools for learning. The past decade has seen an explosion in the tools and software available for making and sharing media. Students today grow up in a world of low-cost digital cameras, high-speed internet, powerful smartphones, free or cheap photo and video editing software, and plenty of spaces to share all of their creations. Creating and sharing media is a critical part of what Henry Jenkins, the media scholar at the University of Southern California, calls participatory culture. This major paradigm shift in the way we communicate. So my first question there, based on that, is what value does media creation and sharing bring to learning? And I think I'll start with Amy on that. What do you think adds to the classroom learning dynamics with media making?
Okay, so since I'm in Sweden, I have to bring up this phenomenon called the IKEA effect, or the people in America say IKEA. But anyway, it's this effect that you love what you make, right? So even if it's putting one little screw in, the fact that you have participated in making something makes it so much more valuable to you. So I think part of that whole Jenkins participatory culture thing is this feeling of value that you get when you are actually being the producer, and that whole shift with the media landscape. And I think for me, that's really empowering for students to have them be able to actually create knowledge in a way if they're doing some ethnography thing, and then they're creating media and contributing it. I know for a fact that when I present all around the world, I often share my students' work, and when my students get tweets back from people who have attended my sessions about how they were influenced by my students' films or whatnot, photographs, it makes them so much more confident, and they feel like it's relevant. The work is more relevant to them, and so we go into every project that involves media making with sort of a new sense of relevance, I guess, that the audience is going to be bigger than their peers or me. God forbid I'm the only audience, so, and that they're really going to be sharing it with the entire world and getting feedback from real people.
That's great. So mentioning the love of making and connecting what they're doing to their interests, and also the ability to connect to authentic audience as two major components of media making for the value of it, that is. Awesome. Oh, go ahead.
Can I add one more thing that I just thought of? There's a thing called bricolage, which people have talked about quite a bit in participatory culture, but that's really using what you have at hand, and I think that's really important that we go where the kids are. Like we use, for example, I've gone to strictly using phones for most of the stuff. Like we have a one-to-one and it's BYOD, and they all have laptops or iPads, but to be honest, most people just want to use their phone. I have high school students, and so we do a lot of media creation and also sharing via our mobile device, and in particular, smartphones. So I think going where, using the tools that we have. I mean, this is a big thing, like, instead of ed tech, it should just be like education with like the tools we already use all the time, right? There should be no ed tech. It should just be education with the stuff we normally use. So I think that's a huge thing. It's like it's where they live, right? Their devices, and they feel ownership with it.
Very cool. Janelle, you also teach high school. What is your take on the value of media making?
I feel, and asking a lot of reflection questions to my learners, a lot of them say that they finally feel that they have a voice, that there's a responses, turning in a paper and things like that. Yeah, the teacher or educator wants to know, the person's opinion wants to know, well, what could you have done better and things like that, but to be able to actually produce a piece that reflects one's opinion, one's informed opinion, one's findings, one's own research, and have that be a reflection of one's own creativity. A lot of my learners said that it was a really great year because they did actually find their voice. And not only that, they're able to see how many tools there are out there and that they can pick and choose and realize which tool is better for whichever message they want to communicate. So for me in high school, that's been a really big deal.
Very cool. How about Jeremy? How about you? You can reflect upon this in your middle school practice, but also, however you like. Where do you see the value?
With my students, it seems to be more or less the bigger audience and having more of an authentic audience. My students have, and they take a much better approach to any projects that we're doing, because it's not just about being handed into the teacher or to the principal. Now I can do it globally, whether that's through sharing stuff through Twitter or through their blog posts, or sharing a video that they've created for a digital book trailer. Any of those things, that more authentic audience that they have, they seem to take more of a vested interest in doing any of the projects because of that authentic audience, and being a maker of that. It empowers them because they know that it's going to that broader audience. And students, in my students specifically with digital, a project I do with digital book trailers, the students, the 8th graders, they are, I feel like they're more empowered, because now they're not just thinking about word choice, but now they're thinking about adding things like background color, and they're thinking about the music that goes along with it, and using all those different components. That it's still a writing process to them. It's still a process to them, but it just seems like they take more of a vested interest in it, because they have to think about these different components, and they are the ones that created it. They have an example to follow, but they're the ones that created it, and it's much more powerful than just putting something on a piece of paper for them.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Troy, what would you like to add to that? So there's a big majority right now of people talking about the authentic audience and having that voice and being heard.
Yes, I mean, I would say ditto to all of that, but the other thing that I think happens with social media, and especially for teachers, I'm interested in students, don't get me wrong, but my work as a teacher educator, I'm especially interested in thinking about how teachers use social media. And what I've come to notice is that even reluctant teachers are starting to say, oh yeah, I need to find out more about Twitter, or oh yeah, I need to find out a little bit more about Flipboard. And I don't know. I mean, at least for me, I've sensed a change in about the last 6 months to a year, where there was kind of this scoffing, like, oh yeah, well, everyone's on Twitter and hashtags, and who cares? And there's also a little bit of joking still around that with viral videos and whatnot. But I think that even teachers who are not necessarily tech lovers are people that are starting to say, okay, yeah, so I can use social media to be social and to have friends and those types of conversations, but I can also use it as a professional resource. And so that's what's really intriguing to me, is that we've kind of made this pivot. There's been this turn in the professional conversation more broadly than, not just the geeks and those of us that have been on Twitter for many years, but those of us that are working in all types of contexts and with varying levels of technology. It seems like people are more and more interested. So that's what's really catching my attention right now.
It's interesting. I find it fascinating because when I was teaching, I taught middle school a while ago, but a little bit before the whole social media revolution. But the big thing was the tools and getting in front of the camera and playing around. And I'm wondering, and now it sounds like the sharing element and having the voice out publicly is sort of taking that sort of taking an emphasis. I'm wondering though, with the process of making and going through like a similar to a writing process, can you guys maybe Janelle, can you talk a little about how you facilitate that process, like what goes into media making and not just media making, but facilitating all your students into designing a media project?
Yeah, I'm happy that the word process has already come up, because I feel that a lot of times when we talk about making media, and you're exactly right, I mean, people see it and it's well produced, and it really we really need to take the time to kind of look at examples of various types of video, of various types of, I don't know, political cartoon, a meme, whatever it may be, and say, hey, well, why was that in this font? Or, what did that music do? Or what is that color? Or what point of view do you know you know, this documentary, how do you know which point of view this is, and what does it do to make sure that it offers that bias or not bias or whatever the case may be. Without looking at those mentor texts, let's say, a lot of the kids are going to kind of miss out on how to best achieve relaying their own message. So that's probably like one of the first steps in working with media and media production. I would also say that, you know, the content has to be there. You have to leave it open for creativity, but also kind of know, well, you know, there are certain parts of the content that we want kids to make sure to look at and to make sure that they hit that important point. So we always carefully plan out rubrics and various benchmarks and things like that. And we always tell them, hey, I know you think this is finished, but we kind of need to go back and revise and revise and revise. There were several times, regardless of what, you know, the application or the tool was, a lot of kids get really, really excited, and it looks really great, but then the content could be like, lacking. So it's really important for us to always return back to the media and say, well, what are you saying with this? What is the purpose, and who is your audience? But really following it up with guidelines ahead of time, but also revisiting those guidelines with the learners as you go along.
Very cool. Amy, how about you? How do you sort of facilitate the process of making? And you're on, yeah.
Yeah, I love what Janelle just said. And one of the things I like to do with that, as far as, I love what she said about mentor text, but to have these exemplars, and I sort of collect them in a G+ or a DGO. I have both as I go through the internet, and as well my students. So they also curate examples of different types of things, different styles of film, different memes and whatnot. And because my class is sort of about critical thinking, we often use it as a springboard for critical thinking, looking at bias and how the medium is the message and all that. But I think it's great to have students be curators of types of things. One of the easiest things that I did, I guess, as far as, you know, taking away me being overwhelmed with all the myriads of tools and examples out there, is I just stick a big poster in my room, and I have Post-its. And whenever a student finds an interesting creator on Vine or Instagram, or perhaps an interesting tool or app, they put it on this wall with a Post-it, and it's called like Tools for Creative Makery or something. And it's a really great resource for me because I don't have to do all the finding myself, and they get really excited that they're contributing to the types of tools that they might be able to use, because again, like, I would never say everyone's going to make a this, you know, or everyone's going to make a that. There's always a lot of choice in deciding what tools to use. So yeah, I'd say put your kids to work when it comes to curating goodies out there. And also, again, like I said, people who are inspiring, who are doing interesting things on Vine, on Instagram, and Vimeo or whatever. And they can even write reviews. I think I'm going to go digital with it and have them do sort of like a digital review archive of all these things next year, instead of just having the analog Post-it wall. But yeah, that's helpful.
That's very cool. I think it's interesting that, you know, students can even start to create their own inspiration, you know, finding things that inspire the work that they're going to then create from. But Troy, how do you think the sort of the new digital writing process can sort of mimic traditional writing process, and how can we gain value from that original process and make sure that the rigor and maintains throughout?
I think one of the main points to consider, and Janelle started talking about this just a moment ago, is that there's this element of craft that we look at when we look at good writers and mentor texts. We say, what did this writer do? How did she make this move? How did she include dialogue? What are the kinds of details and examples that are included? What does it mean to support a thesis, or so forth? And then we can layer on these digital elements, and we include, say, a hyperlink. And it sounds really simple on the surface, but when you start to unpack that question and you work with kids, sentence is constructed around a particular word, and when that word or phrase becomes a hyperlink, and then what is that link going to? Is it going to a resource that you searched on Google? Was it the first thing? Was it something that you looked at kind of underneath the surface and you had to dig into the web a little bit? So thinking about all those elements as choices that writers are making, for me, is the really big shift in the conversation.
That's interesting. So is that like a sort of a first entry point media project? Is to kind of hyperlink a traditional text perhaps that you're making? How would you start from traditional writing or facilitating traditional writing to media making? What would be a good first step?
Well, a good example that I've adapted from some of our teachers from last summer's Institute at Chippewa River Writing Project is that we took this paragraph about learning in the cloud and why teachers would want to learn in the cloud. And then by using this heuristic, this problem-solving device that I've put in a few of my books, and it's in Jeremy, the book that I wrote here with Jeremy as well, and he can talk about how he uses it with his students. It's called MAPS, and we look at the mode and the media. So with mode, we're thinking about the genre and what are the characteristics of this particular genre. So what are the characteristics of a narrative compared to an argument, compared to an informational piece. And then with media, we're thinking about what are the characteristics of this particular kind of media. So if I'm going to present my personal memoir as an essay on 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper as compared to presenting it in a series of blog posts as compared to recording it as a podcast, what do those different forms of media afford me? And then the rest of the MAPS acronym is audience, purpose, and situation. And we've already been talking about audience and purpose quite a bit. And then situation, of course, is how much time you have, the tools you have available, the skills that you have, whether you're collaborating with someone, whether it's for an assignment or for your own personal writing. But like I said, Jeremy can talk a little bit more about how he uses that to help frame assignments. But for me, keeping those rhetorical elements in mind and then thinking about the elements of craft, like what makes good writing, whether it's on paper, on screen, in video, as well as those choices that you're making about media in particular to get your desired effects. That's what really helps kids and teachers, for that matter, make really smart decisions as digital writers.
That's great. That's a great sort of framework, MAPS. Jeremy, can you talk about how you might use that and how much sort of how many constraints do you put on top of it, or is it just sort of open to students in terms of the arguments and the media modes and so forth?
For me, it's not. I try not to restrict my students too much. Kind of going back to what Janelle was saying with the creativity. I want my students to be creative, but the MAPS process is something that the students do on top of their brainstorming, because I want them to know the bigger question of why are you doing this, and what is the purpose behind, and obviously that's one of the P's in MAPS, but the overall why to these tools that we're using within classroom. Why are we looking at digital media? Why are we using digital tools instead of writing an essay, or and it really helps them to get that right mindset before they actually dive into a project. And then one of the other things I was going to mention before Troy, it's something to talk about MAPS, was the reflection piece. I think that media has definitely helped in my classroom. We go back and we revisit MAPS at the end, and we talk about, okay, were you accurate in what you were trying to achieve when you set up this MAPS? Not only that, just with MAPS, but just the reflection piece in general, and talking about those different components, like, why did you choose this piece of music, or why did you choose this image? Was it effective? What would you have done differently the next time you do this? And it kind of goes back again to what Janelle was saying with this writing process, and we talked about it in our institute today about how the writing process doesn't seem to be linear anymore, especially when we're talking about digital media. It's more of a circular thing now, where we're constantly coming back to it and revising and revising and revising and trying to make it better. And it's never finished, and writing in general is never finished, and that's the beauty of writing. But I think that really says a lot too with digital media and what the students are creating. And so the MAPS is, for me, that my students do the MAPS at the beginning and at the end, but they're doing it as part of the reflection, and that idea of the writing process is not linear anymore. It's more of a circle.
Interesting. Janelle, how do you feel about like if a new teacher were or a teacher were starting to create or assign media projects to their class? Do you leave it open, or I mean, if they not even if they how much do they sort of give up control versus in their comfort
Yeah,
level?
I
How
think
do you start?
that's a great question to pose because I believe whenever we come up with this idea of us not only as media consumers but roles not only in that relationship but also in the classroom because myself as a facilitator, I'm already not like in the center of what's going on in the classroom, but yeah, with all these tools I've had to take a step back and kind of say, well, this is here, and with resources like KQED's education blog, the Do Now blog also has a lot of tutorials and things like that of great tools in various ways, from Zigas to making memes and all of these different things and great tools that we can look at. But a lot of times my learners, my kids have already played with that. So for me, I can look and find all these different tools, which is great, and I can suggest that particular tool. For example, when we wanted them to make infographics, we suggested some online possibilities, that were simpler, that I would probably use. They were drag and drop and things like that. And most of our learners, most of our groups in creating their infographics just went to an Adobe product that they had already on their laptop. They were willing to take that risk because it enabled them to express themselves and be as creative and come up with a product that they want. So I say if you're just starting it, come up with some good resources, just as Amy suggested. Really curate those resources that can give you a collection of tools to suggest to your kids. And the way we start is we kind of say, hey, here's this tool, let's try this out. And then by second semester or midway second semester, they have this whole arsenal of tools that they can use to express themselves, and they're really picking and choosing and playing around. And the great thing is too is that if it's something that I'm not really comfortable with, then my learners become the mini experts and they can run the mini workshops, and that in and of itself is very empowering. But then I also get to learn too, so
That's awesome. Amy, how about you? How do you look at sort of beginning points for an educator?
Beginning points for an educator. Yeah, it's a huge shift in relationships, really. Like I said, I mean, I think it all comes back to who's doing the most work. Is it me or is it the kids? Because if it's the kids, then they're doing the most learning. And I've even done weird things like I've found, and this might seem a little backwards because I know it's like not all about the tool, but sometimes in my particular class, because it's sort of this meta look about media as well, we often find a tool and we say, how can we use this in some kind of project? And I know that sounds just kind of bizarre, but for example, there's this new thing called cinemagraphs, which is a juxtaposition of film and photography. And it gives you this sort of eerie feeling of being in the moment but not. I mean, you erase part of the film and it's still, and yet there's part of the film existing. So it's very unique, and most of my students had never heard of it before. But I had read an article by Coco Rocha, a famous model, that said this is the new thing in media as far as like fashion photography, whatever, because it's just pushing the limits of what a still photography can do. So I put that out there to the students because I know they're great photographers. I'm like, could we use this to articulate some kind of concept that we're studying? Like, here's our next unit. What could we possibly do with this actual tool? And there's many, apps that do it, but I found it really interesting. They were coming up with really cool ideas about, tying it to the content that we were studying. So I know that sounds a little backwards, but I thought that was interesting. But it was me giving it up to the students to think of it on their own. So I have this idea wall, which is just like blackboard paint and chalk, and students post ideas all the time of just project ideas, like, oh, we should do a scavenger hunt with our phones and like take footage of this or that, and or an Instagram challenge of the week and have it be about this. And so basically, yeah, I just give the students the voice, just I say, I don't know all the answers, and I would love your input. So if anyone has a great idea, like, here's my idea, maybe you have a better one. That's what I do.
Very cool.
I think too, I'm sorry, I think too
Yeah.
that we forget that a lot of our learners are used to, looking online and learning, online from various people from across the world and things like that. So to be able to see a teacher, an educator, a facilitator who is willing to do that same thing, to kind of relinquish the control and say, okay, no, I want to learn from you too, because you're just another person, another, community, another network that I can make, and you're valued as part of this teaching and learning. I think that that is not only something that they'll find familiar, but they'll also understand that it is more of a community of learning, and they'll feel more comfortable taking risks.
Great. I'd like to get sort of specific for a second about the types of media assignments and projects you guys have sort of facilitated. Can you guys share, can each of you sort of think about something that you thought was really successful, or even something that was really challenging and maybe not as successful as you had imagined, and sort of talk through a little bit of what it was that your students made, and what types of, what the assignment was like, and what the actual end result was, and in a short time, of course. But maybe Jeremy, do you have something you'd like to reflect on?
Well, I alluded earlier to the digital book trailers that my middle schoolers.
Oh yeah, can you talk about that? That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of going along with the things that Amy and Janelle were saying, with relinquishing some of the, the control. And, I always introduce Animoto to my students, and my students use Animoto for the most part to create their digital book trailers. But I always have students that come up to me and they're like, can I use something else? Can I use something like WeVideo? Or they might have something else that's out there, some other tool that's out there. And I'm like, if you can make it work, great, let's make it work. The process of going through that, it's pretty neat to see the kids, the thinking that goes through their minds, and again, playing into the idea of backgrounds and music and images and video. I want their product to look very similar to the digital book trailers that I give them as their model text. And I always try to go out and find ones that are created by other students. I don't want, because there are people that are doing that professionally now, and they're not going to get that close. Middle schoolers aren't going to get that close, but I try to get them as close as I want to be as close as possible to the examples that they have. And it's. There are times that it is frustrating, because I come from a school, or I teach at a school that's very low income, and there's students that don't have access to that media all the time, so they're not necessarily students that play around with it on a regular basis. So I have students that are, I have to stand by their side practically the whole 55 minutes I'm in class, trying to help them. And then you have like Janelle said, that some of those experts, and I call those students my tech army recruits. They're the ones that go and help the other students while I'm trying to sit next to that one student. You have these students that want to be innovators, which is awesome. They fit within the guidelines. They want to try these new tools, and then they have epic fails within those new tools. And so they want to know, well, what do I do? And it's like, okay, well, you're going to have to go back to the point where you kind of messed up and try to start again, or go with the guidelines that I set forward for you with the tool that I gave you. So there's a lot of ups and downs, but I think it kind of mirrors the writing process in general anyways. I think you're going to have that whether you're having them do an essay or you're having them do a digital book trailer. So it's not anything that's too frustrating. It's a process, and they're learning, they're growing, and they're being creative, which is really important. Cool. and that's what I like to see.
Are they in this sounds amazing. Are they shooting video for these trailers, or are they just sort of finding media online? What are their resources in making these trailers?
Some of them are finding media online, and we talk about fair use policy and using those images that are that they can use. And we also some students do shoot video and put actual video in there. Again, it's fitting within the guidelines, but allowing them to be creative and allowing them to be comfortable in what they know how to do. And so I always leave that door open for them. So it's a combination of both things.
Awesome. Troy, would you like to share some example that you've been sort of observing, or actually as a practitioner?
Sure. So one of the projects that I worked on this year was with another colleague that Matt, Dawn Reed from Michigan, and she was having her ninth grade students engage in the research process. And we were trying to think about what can we do to help them use technology in smart, productive ways to not only do the academic kind of research paper that we're expected to teach, but then also give them an opportunity for that creative outlet. And so what we came up with was a repurposed multimedia project, and we left it pretty wide open for students and gave them opportunities to try different things throughout the course of the unit. And so we were just playing around with their phones and different perspectives in the classroom. We were looking at TED Talks as examples of how a speaker might give a presentation. We were looking at various presentations that exist online and critiquing them. All kinds of different things like that. And then the students themselves came up with some, of course, as you would expect, really creative, interesting digital things. But what I was most fascinated by was one young lady who decided to create a print poster, and she made her whole essay was about beauty and the way that beauty is perceived in different parts around the world. She wanted to have a poster that she could carry around school and kind of gauge people's reaction. So she had some typical American models of beauty, but then she also had images with some tribal women from Africa with very large jewelry. One woman had a piece of jewelry in her lip and it was hanging out, and this young woman wanted to gauge how her peers were reacting to this. So she made a very conscious choice. She could have put it in a PowerPoint, she could have put it on a website, but she chose to print it in that case. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, if you set up the task and you do truly allow them the flexibility and freedom, they may not always choose digital, but they may choose to do something unique and interesting in analog ways. And I think that's what's really fascinating about it. And I just wanted to connect back really quickly to the maps piece. Like, maybe some things you're not flexible on, like we have to write an argument. Okay, we're going to create an argument piece here. Now, how you create that piece, whether you create a visual argument or whether you put it in a website or whether you do et cetera, that might be the choice that they get. So we still have standards and objectives to meet and academic thinking goals that we want them to achieve, but we can go about it in different ways.
Very cool. I want to jump into that in a little bit about sort of the rigor and meeting those academic goals, but I'm still very curious to hear Janelle and Amy share some of their examples. Janelle, why don't you chime in and give an example of something that you like to share of the many, besides the infographics?
Yeah. I would think that probably one.
Uh-oh.
It was the I Am Malala campaign, and when we just kind of opened it up and they saw the mentor piece of the I Am Malala song and the video and things like that, and they learned about Malala and what was happening, and just to see what they came up with in their video, for many of them, that was a turning point, because not only were they able to create, you know, what they wanted, as far as really educating us on what was happening in that part of the world and what happened with Malala and why it's important. But also they submitted it to the website, and so they know that more people have viewed it. And it's just refreshing to see, and it was exciting to see that kids were already making choices that were powerful as far as camera angle and things like that, and that wasn't anything that we taught. But it's because they've picked up, you know, from various, models that we showed them, but also movies and things like that that they see on their own. And I think that was probably the biggest surprise of this year that kids kept going back to, because not only was it a piece of media that they could create, but it was a social issue that they became really engaged in. And again, it goes back to that voice, that wider audience, and them being able to create something that could make a difference.
That's really interesting. And there were some amazing pieces and some amazing editing of taking like news footage and being able to put them together to complete a sentence even. So really precise stuff.
Yeah, they just ran with it. It was great.
Yeah, very cool. Amy, how about you?
Okay, so first I have to touch on the shout out to the analog plus digital, because that's really Lovely thing. And actually, the first day of school, I like to get, my seniors and juniors dirty by giving them Play-Doh and chenille sticks and stuff. And we do stop motion remixes of quotes that have to do with our class, quotes about knowledge. So they have to interpret the quote in some visual way with, very hands-on. What this does is it gets them working together, but also gets me to see how they troubleshoot. So they do all kinds of crazy things, like put their phone on top of a ruler on top of stacks of Play-Doh to get a bird's eye view and stuff like that. And I go around and I take pictures of how they're troubleshooting and how they're executing the video. But that being said, I think there's a couple things that have come up. We do a This I Believe project every year, which is the traditional This I Believe essay, but we do it as a film, and students can do any type of film they want. So that has always been, when I ask for their reflections, one of their favorites, because you just get this complete array of everything from sketch casting to stop motion to mashup of video footage to music videos, and you just get this very personalized these personalized products, but which are very heartfelt because it's what they really believe in. It's really about them. But another thing that we do a lot of is remix, and I met a guy at South by Southwest who teaches English in about the farthest place you can get from Hawaii, Maine, and he teaches AP Lit, and we thought we would do a remix project with him. So our students both created visual poems. There were 9 panels of completely visual. And they wrote their poem on the side but kept it secret. And then we sent each other our visuals. And the new person kind of remixed the visual into a poem. When we compared the poem, how well did our visuals articulate our meaning in the first place? And sometimes really well, sometimes not. But in the end, they got together and created a final multimedia project that was sort of a mashup of the two poems. So we called it Remash. So it was like a remix and a mashup. But the last part is I really have to say that Twitter is, for social media as well, that like we hold our whole class in Twitter. So this is where we think aloud. And I think having weekly Twitter questions and having all of our Socratic seminars on Twitter and having back channels when we watch a film or a TED Talk, and just being out there with our class hashtag has allowed the world to come in. And I think that's the greatest game changer in our whole class, to be honest, is just on Twitter in a very active way. Because kids aren't really on Twitter when they first come to me. They just don't even get it. They don't even want to be on Twitter. But I make them be on Twitter. And they really see that it's going to make a difference and that real people connect with them. And it's a great way to do research. It's a great way to connect and amplify your work. So.
Very cool. It's funny, Janelle too has used the hashtag as a great way to sort of connect her students in her class through the Do Now project, and have become a force to be reckoned with on Twitter. The question of, there's a lot of questions I still have, but I'm thinking of the next one just that makes sense to me is this idea of rigor and how media making can really lend itself to the continual critical thinking and writing process, and not having it be, I think of media making, I sometimes think of like iMovie and all the effects and sound effects and transition effects and the bells and whistles and so forth. So to some people, they might think, oh, well, it's just sort of glorifying, or it's a little, too much bells and whistles and not enough sort of substance and content. So how do you sort of make sure and ensure that rigor continues, whether you're linking up to Common Core standards or and not it not being just this sort of fluff per se. Troy, how about you? How don't you chime in on that one?
Well, yeah, another overlap to our conversation today. We were looking at the framework for success in post-secondary writing that National Writing Project, among other professional groups, was a part of producing a few years ago. And one of the things that really bubbled to the surface was this idea of metacognition. And so in order to do that kind of reflective thinking and analysis, this sounds so obvious, but I think we just need to invite kids to do it and then show them how to do it. And so one example in particular that I was working on this spring. I was at my daughter's sixth grade classroom. Her language arts teacher and I got to talking at parent-teacher conferences. One thing led to another. This is what professors do, right? And so I ended up in their classroom, and I was kind of helping co-teach a lesson. And we had them create their reading portfolios for the end of the year. But not only did they create the portfolio, they created a screencast about their portfolio. And in their screencast, they had to answer some big questions like, who are you as a reader? How have you changed as a reader? What evidence can you point to show the change in your reading habits and things like that? And I'll try to find the link to some of the questions. But for me, really, it's about encouraging metacognition, like just slowing down long enough to pause, to use a tool like Sketch to annotate a screenshot of a digital project, to use a tool like QuickTime to just record a screencast where a kid is talking through a project, kind of like a director's cut. I just think encouraging that kind of reflection and metacognition is one of the ways to really show that this isn't fluff. This is actually real academic work that we're engaging kids in.
So you're saying kind of having them justify almost like the choices they've made and to go through it. So especially with things that are maybe not so easily evident.
Absolutely.
Like a drawing or something like that.
Right.
How about you, Janelle? The challenge of rigor.
Yeah, so, and there's some actually good stuff happening on the chat too in Educator, Innovator. One of the questions was, well, a lot of the media production deals with shorter responses, shorter text production and things like that. And a lot of that is true because who's going to sit and read like paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs? But if you look at it, and I'm thinking about Do Now again, when people respond on the discussion board, for example, my co-teacher and I, Danae, we make sure that we say, hey, you need to answer the prompt, and that would be like your thesis statement, and you need to offer your evidence. And so we're teaching them skills that will allow them to craft small pieces of a larger, longer text. And that's important to be able to see something, even concentrating it even more to Twitter, which is a big challenge for the kids when they first start doing that. That's even more challenging. But the great thing about it is that not only are they able to do that rigorous task of, yes, I can state my claim and I can support it, but they're also able to defend it and reason why in a respectful manner. That's the key. In a respectful manner, and have these meaningful discussions with people who have very different viewpoints. And if that's not rigorous, if it's not rigorous to ask our kids, hey, can you have an informed opinion about this? Can you have an intelligent discussion that may have both sides in it, but can you continue this discussion and this critical discourse? I really find there to be little more rigorous than that as far as that goes. But other than that, we still have our rubrics, and we do use our state standards because we're not Common Core, because it's Texas, of course. And and we also support our school-wide learning outcomes, which are a little different. But they can constantly see how the activities that they're doing with media and on Twitter and things like that it isn't an academic setting, and let's keep that clear, and let's make sure that we are using the correct tone and serving the correct audience. So.
Great. Is there tension, do you think, between reaching that authentic audience and keeping it academic when perhaps things that go viral might not necessarily hit upon academic points? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I actually was thinking that the whole time. I wanted to go a little rogue and step away from the teacher world and just say that I often say that there should be universal specs. And the universal spec should be, is it beautiful? Is it poignant, which means sticky? Is it relevant? like what is it giving people, and is it shareable? Because like if it's not shareable, what's the point? So like I often tell my kids that like forget about the rubrics, forget about the Common Core, whatever, just forget about that, because what's real is like when you leave this classroom and you go out into the real world and you are going to make media, that's what's going to matter. You know, are you making something that's going to make people think and be sticky and be, and not necessarily like you want a viral video every time, but like what are the components to being a viral video?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and what are the, how, you know, what is beautiful when it when it comes to whatever media you're talking about. So I think that because we're humans and the cloud is our campfire. I mean, that's where we tell our stories, and that's what this all is all about, is storytelling, right? It's all storytelling, and that's, if you step out of the whole education world, that's what it comes down to. I don't know. That's me being
Nice.
rogue. Sorry, Matt.
That's okay. I'm just seeing a thousand tweets saying the cloud is our new campfire.
Yeah, that's my.
Speaking of, as you know, our students get older and hit the real world or face the real world, with media making and these new media literacies that we haven't really discussed, but what are those things that we're trying to sort of value to teach our students? What kinds of things are we aiming for them to attain in this process of you know, this new learning landscape? You know, and if media making is a big part of that, then what do they need to gain through the process of media making? Janelle, or go ahead, Amy. Amy, go ahead. Oh, you just muted yourself.
Similar to what Janelle said about sort of this show your work movement, like really being overt about your creative processes, almost like a scientist, so you can replicate the experiment. I think that's very powerful, and then knowing how to navigate different virtual environments, like Janelle was talking about, not only how to navigate them, but dealing with the people in them in effective ways and respectful ways and mature ways. I think that's probably the most important thing. But one thing that has been changing quite a bit, and Clive Thompson writes about this in his recent book, Smarter Than You Think, is this huge shift towards public thinking and the writing being more succinct and more concise. So when someone says, oh yeah, well that movie's only 3 minutes, it's not a 25-page paper. I'm sorry, but you know what? That is where our writing is headed. You know, our writing is headed to be, we need to know how to say a lot in 140 characters. You know, and I think that's a skill that maybe we're not leveraging. I mean, we're not cultivating it that much right now. I think that our students need a lot more practice in that.
Well, I think,
yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. I think as we continue to write, we're finding ourselves identifying that little niche that we have, that where we have a place in the conversation. So it becomes more of a conversation than just a bunch of people saying their own thought that doesn't necessarily relate to other things that are being made simultaneously. But Troy, how do you feel about this idea?
I would agree with what Amy has said, and I would add one other piece to it in saying that I think it's a both and, not an either or. And that is that as a parent as well as a teacher and a teacher educator, you know, I'm not trying to go all Common Core on everybody here, but I don't want 12th graders to graduate from high school not knowing what an argument is and how to put evidence in writing and construct sentences and paragraphs. That said, I also want them to be able to construct a 3-minute video, like Amy said, because certainly there are some 3-minute videos that are much more powerful than any essay we're going to read, or for that matter, any, you know, full-length feature film. So I think it's a both and for some reason I think that gets lost sometimes. I'm afraid that some of the other things that happen with the Common Core, with the whole we don't teach narrative anymore in high school, or you know, it's all about informational texts and not about narrative texts, and you know, or you know, some of these other kinds of things. We don't teach literature. You know, I think that can scare a well-meaning English teacher could get scared by that and say, well, oh, I'm going to hold on to all the things that I know how to do, and no, it can be both, and it should be both, and you know, talking with kids about it in those similar ways, like, this is a process. Let's talk about the process of creating that short film as compared to the process of writing that argument essay. What are some of the same strategies you use? What did you do that was different? And yeah, and as Amy just mentioned, also I think there is consideration with visual thinking, but I also would not want my students or my own children to not be able to write either. So I think it's a both and. I agree with you and would add that as well.
Great. Jeremy, how about you?
Well, and I don't know if I'm answering your question effectively, but one of the things I think about when trying to meet the needs of kids, I think about the collaboration process. I mean, when they're going out into the real world, I mean that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be collaborating with people, and I always think about that. And what are the activities that we're doing to where they're collaborating and they're doing that deeper thinking and they're doing those types of things. And so I try to set up a lot of things within my classroom where it's going to mirror what they are going to be doing in the real world. And that is talking to people and collaborating with people, and whether that is collaborating with people in digital spaces or they're doing it face to face or they're working on projects face to face, and it can be a digital project that they're working on, in the real world. But that idea of collaboration just keeps coming back as I'm listening to people talk. I just think that is really important, and and especially with digital media today, and how the different ways that people are collaborating, especially with Twitter, and how there's just so many different Twitter chats that are available out there where teachers are collaborating, and and how powerful that can be for our students to learn how to do that, and how that can be definitely can be a powerful way for them to learn how to do it in the workplace. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that's definitely answered my question. That's a huge skill. Janelle, why don't your final thoughts on real skills, workforce or future, not necessarily workforce, but just out of school real world skills.
I think it's all about helping our kids feel safe to ask questions and wondering and being honest about what they know and don't know. I think it's about giving them access to look for information to help them find the answers to those questions, or not a definitive perhaps answer, but being able to become more informed in whatever type of discussion may come up as far as what's happening in the world. How does that affect me? Yes, I'm part of this larger network. What does that mean? How can I respectfully have this discussion? Yes, with my peers, maybe with a professor, maybe with an expert over here, maybe with someone who I don't agree with, but who next year I could be working alongside with in the workplace. For me, that's what making media and social media can help to achieve, as far as getting my kids out there with the skills of, no, this is what I believe, or this is my main point, and this is why X, Y, Z. What do you have to say? I'm going to respectfully listen. An agreement or not, but I think that is the potential that making media has.
Great. Wow. Well, we're almost out of time, and I just want to thank you guys so much for coming on and having this amazing conversation. I think it's been really insightful. I want to just also say, this wraps up our third webinar of the Teach Do Now course, but that doesn't mean our conversations have to pause here. We encourage everyone to keep the energy going by using the Twitter hashtag #TeachDoNow and getting involved in the ongoing conversations in our Google Plus community. We have a Do Now prompt up this week about media making for learning, and encourage you to look at that prompt and to continue to have the conversation. Mark your calendars for next Monday, July 28th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern for our fourth webinar in this series as we explore civic engagement. And again, we're almost out of time. I wanted to again thank Amy, Janelle, Jeremy, and Troy for coming on and talking. You guys are awesome, and I know we're all over the world right now, and getting together to talk has been great. To learn more about Educator Innovator, who's our partner on this webinar in this course, and its network of partners, please check out www.educatorinnovator.org. And for more information about connected learning activities happening this summer, check out www.makesummer.org and follow the Twitter hashtag #MakeSummer. One last announcement is that we're going to be having our Do Now working group application, which is out now. We're going to be having another semester of teachers who can participate in Do Now, which is open to anyone, but there's a special group of teachers who will go through the semester and learn how to do Now effectively with their students. And that application is up on the KQED Do Now website if you're interested in becoming a Do Now teacher. Thank you again. That's 5 o'clock, and that marks the end of this webinar. Thanks so much for joining.
I am in Sweden.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nothing.